let's say we have a normal person that's watching this and then they want to be able to identify if someone is going to be a future mass shooter or mass killer. If you had to give them a checklist of what to look for, what would that checklist be? And like, how should they approach that situation? Because like, you don't want to make it obvious that you view someone as a mass killer, but at the same time, you don't want to just ignore it, right? So like, what would that checklist be and how should they approach the situation?
Right. So I would say that these are children that fall through the cracks. So they're not seen, they're marginalized. So I'm going to go through. So I wrote the 10 warning signs of a mass shooter, and
Okay.
maybe I'll go
Okay.
through that if that's okay.
Okay, cool. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
No problem.
So often they're smart, as we discussed. They're quiet and they're unmoored. So they don't have friends, or if they have friends, or disenfranchised friends, that are also kind of discarded. They're very quiet. Like with the Georgia high school shooter, I think the girl next to him in home class didn't even know what the sound of his voice was. So these are
Mm.
like really like they're invisible kids. They're like the mother called the school the day of the shooting and said, my son might be a mass shooter, and they looked for a kid with a similar name. So this is a kid who is invisible, basically.
Wow.
Yeah. So they're also isolated, marginalized, and bullied, like I mentioned. So um, I forget which case it was, but the mother, it's where the mother and the father both were put in jail for 15 years, and I can't think of the name of it right, the name of the shooting, but in
Mm.
that case, the neighbor wrote an article saying that she knew her next door neighbor's son was going to become a mass shooter because the parents isolated him so much. And she actually offered to babysit him for free because she also had a son and she thought they could play together and he could be socialized, and the mother refused. And then I guess one point the neighbors went on a vacation and then they took this he became a mass shooter with them because she felt so bad for him. And in that case too, he begged the parents for psychiatric care, and it fell on deaf ears. um, so they're isolated, marginalized, bullied often in school. They're mocked because they have poor hygiene, and because they can't take a shower, they don't have proper clothes. They're often hungry, they're not fed right, so they're often mocked in school. And then you have childhood abuse and neglect. So often they're physically beaten, or they see parents beating themselves up. They're screamed at. In case of the Georgia high school shooter, his mother threatened to kill him twice. Uh, an important one here that I feel very strong about is parental minimalization and or denial of the child's mental health illness. So the parents are ignoring or neglecting it, and often the parents have their own mental health illness. Like as in the case of the Georgia high school shooter, both of them were addicted to alcohol and substance. That's actually how the mother lost custody of the kids the first time her urine test came back for opioids and methamphetamine and other things.
Yeah.
So they're not really able to address their own mental health issues, and then they can't address the child's, even though the child, in so many of these cases, is begging them for care.
Hmm.
And then they're experiencing humiliation and shame. So they feel intense humiliation and shame. They feel embarrassed. They don't feel good about themselves. Why should they feel good about themselves? I mean, I think one of the mass shooters that I studied, he was sleeping in the insulation in his house,
Really?
and he didn't have proper clothes and food, and he couldn't take a shower, and he would go to school, and kids would bully him. It's really tough if you're not getting your minimum basic requirements to feel good about yourself. And then you have mental health illness on top of that. So that's a really important one, feeling shame and
Shame.
humiliation.
Yeah.
And then a lot of them, like I said, that study that we had, and I should say that a problem in the research of mass shooting and terrorism is that it doesn't get funded. So, for instance, the study that we did, and I did the study with other psychiatrists and a death row lawyer. But we did it all pro bono. We didn't get paid, even though it was. I mean, I spent 2 or 3 years studying this. Most research do not have psychiatrists. They have psychologists. They have other people, criminologists, but they don't have psychiatrists. So often, the mental health aspect of mass shootings and terrorism is not adequately looked at. So, the research, if you look at the research with the FBI, they'll say that anywhere from 30 to like maybe 60% have a mental health illness. But we actually found, and we had psychiatrists in our team, that 87.5%, which was by far the majority, had
Yeah.
severe mental illness. They actually were schizophrenic. Um, and once they got, I can give an example after I talk about this, but basically,
Yeah.
most of these people are psychotic, they're suicidal, they're homicidal. So I can give the instance of, I can't say his name. It's a Thurston high school shooting. It's, again, it was a high school. And I'm going to try not to say his name.
Yeah. 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 No problem. No problem.
Okay. He basically heard three male voices, one telling him to kill, one telling him that he was a bad person, and the other third male voice was commenting on the other two. His He told his father that he was hearing voices, he wanted psychiatric care. The father, I think because of health and mental health stigma, was embarrassed and ashamed of the son, refused to bring him. His solution, the father's solution, was he threatened to send him to military academy. So this was a kid who got explosives. He made explosives. He was blowing up explosives in his garage. The parents do nothing,
No.
and so he's grossly psychotic. I think he was 14 or 15. He killed both his parents. The next day, I think he killed a number of students, injured a number of students, and somehow he wasn't killed. So he was put into the penal system. Again, a really bright guy. He got his GED. He got his BA. He teaches yoga, and most important thing, he was put on an antipsychotic, and literally within 10 days, his auditory hallucinations stopped. So with antipsychotics, they treat auditory visual hallucinations within 10 days. Delusions take longer, but literally, this boy's distress of a voice telling him to kill stopped in 10 days with proper psychiatric medication. And he went on to be like this model prisoner. He teaches yoga in the prison to other inmates. He um, got his electrical degree. He's an electrician in the penal system, and he prays for all the people he killed. So
Really.
it shows you, with treatment, this could have been avoided. It's so sad. So
Yeah.
yeah, so these people deserve immediate psychiatric care.
Hmm.
And then another one is that they have difficulty coping with stressors and trauma, given they're not taught how to, or, their parents can't model how to deal with failure, loss, defeat, humiliation, shame, and they don't know how to cope. So, how they cope by going online, getting radicalized, and then feeling a sense of belonging.
Hmm.
And then many, many of them have fantasies about violence. They all have fantasies about violence, whether it's writing it in a homework assignment. Many of them write it in their diaries. Like I mentioned with the Georgia high school shooter, he on Discord he wrote he was going to be a mass shooter. Sometimes they draw pictures, saying, please, please help, the voices won't stop, which was the boy whose both parents were found guilty, although the mother was trying to get out of jail because she just didn't understand, really her part in this and
Mm.
in making him a mass shooter. So there's always fantasies about violence. And then there's overt statements about violent plans. So, for instance, the Georgia high school shooter telling his mom, I'm going to be a mass shooter, right? and I think he also told her he was obsessed with the Parkland shooter in Florida. So, just listening to someone, you don't have to even be a psychiatrist and try to read between the lines. I mean, they will overtly tell you either in writing or in statements that this is what they plan to do. And then the last one, which our country seems to not be able to wrap their head around, is
Yeah.
easy access to firearm. And so many of these mass shooters, their father bought them a weapon, even though they knew that their child had mental health struggles and was being neglected, bullied, marginalized, wasn't going to school, had no interest. Um, that's it's the perfect storm. So I would say those are the 10 warning signs that you
Signs.
should look for in a child that might become a mass shooter. These are
Yeah.
children that are really invisible, unfortunately. Most people don't see or hear them or recognize them.
So, I mean, to be honest, like most people, like just based off common sense, you'll be able to tell if someone is not in the right mental space, and if you can feel if they're going to do something that they shouldn't do, right? So, like,
Absolutely.
but why do so many people just ignore it? Because it's such a common theme of just blatantly ignoring the signs. Like, why exactly is that?
Well, I think most people don't want to get involved, like it's a headache or they
Yeah,
don't have time,
nervous
they have to
too.
rush into work or they have their own problems or,
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, but I will say, in so many of these cases that I studied, classmates, neighbors will report to the FBI that they think that this child might become a mass shooter, and it falls through the cracks anyhow. So I always say,
Hmm.
if you can, reach out to a child that you're seeing that's bullied, that's marginalized, even if it's just like saying hi, how are you, and being kind. Like what happened with Aaron Stark, right? Offering him some food, offering him like, love and care. That can be enough to stop it. So I just think most people don't want to get involved because they feel like they don't have the time, or they don't want the headache. But it doesn't have to necessarily be bringing someone to an ER, right? Which is really involved. It can be just, you don't look right. Can I do something for you today? I don't know, give you some water? Can I give you some food? Something's not right here. What can I do to help you? Just it's the simplest thing, but just reaching out to someone that's being bullied, marginalized, and is disconnected, like these kids.